George Zimmerman says it was self-defense. The prosecution says it was murder. But what does the evidence say? Tonight on HLN After Dark, we'll take you inside the evidence that the jury in Sanford, Florida will see. The evidence that will determine what happened on that rainy Sunday night inside that gated Central Florida community. Ryan Smith is off tonight, so Darren Kavanoki is with our in-studio jury here at HLN headquarters in Atlanta. What will they say about the evidence in this case? What do they think it will prove? The man who represented O.J. Simpson and Charlie Sheen, Florida criminal defense attorney Yale Galanter, joins us from Miami tonight. Also joining us from the Sunshine State, Jacksonville criminal defense attorney Janet Johnson. Our trial insider this evening from New York, New York, Double J, Joey Jackson. And our in-studio experts, criminal defense attorneys Ashley Merchant, John Phillips, and Holly Hughes. And here to help us understand the forensics from the autopsy, death investigator and the author of Blood Beneath My Feet, Joseph Scott Morgan. Tonight, we begin with the evidence. Before the jury in Sanford sees it, you'll see it, and our in-studio jury will see it beginning right now.
Something's wrong with him. Yeah, he's coming to check me out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Moments later, Martin, who is black, and Zimmerman, who's Hispanic, struggle in the dark. Neighbors call 911.
My jacket came up and my shirt came up and exposed my firearm. And I just pinched his arm and I grabbed my gun and I aimed it at him and fired one shot.
Zimmerman claims Martin beat him up before he shot the 17-year-old.
The only thing in Trayvon Martin's hand was a bag of Skittles.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right, what is your...
But whose voice is it? One resident tells CNN she saw fighting, heard shouting, and screams for help. Trayvon Martin was shot in the chest, pronounced dead at the scene.
There's only one person alive who knows what happened, and that's Zimmerman.
Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there is a lot of evidence in this case. We have George Zimmerman's call to authorities. We have a neighbor's call to authorities. There's a lot to consider. What is the most important item of evidence that you've heard so far? Juror number one.
I'd like to know what kind of gun it is and if it had a safety or not, if you just pull it right out and that kind of thing.
So you got some questions, but what about the evidence that we know about? Juror number five, what do you think the most important item is so far?
The recorded police tapes, because Zimmerman says he's coming for me. How could Trayvon be coming for him if he's walking and Zimmerman's driving?
So you've got some powerful questions based on that. Yes. Juror number six, what do you say?
I'd say the toxicology report. Because if he was acting suspiciously, was there a reason for George Zimmerman to suspect that there was something in his system that was causing him to act that way?
So you want to know what was going on inside of Trayvon Martin. Interesting. Let's run to, juror number three. Yeah, you got something to say. Let us
I think forensics.
So you too, you want to know what the forensics say. Let's go to
toxicology, but forensics.
So when you say forensics, what are you referring to?
Gunshot wound, the distance from the shooter to the shootee, if you will.
So thankfully, we're going to have some expert opinion to help us solve some of the forensic issues. Juror number four, what do you say?
I say the 911 tapes.
So you want to know about what was going on as it was actually happening. Yes. Now, the rest of you, you're not off the hook either. We're coming to the back row next. But, Vinny, what do you say?
Well, you know, there's a lot of evidence here, but what really can happen in this case, because of all the recordings and the eyewitnesses and the timestamps, there's a timeline of events here that I think is so important. But here's what I want from my experts tonight, okay? We're talking about the evidence tonight. We're going to break it all down, but I want to start with just one word to describe the evidence in this case. Ashley Merchant.
Inconclusive.
John Phillips.
You know, I represent a kid named Jordan Davis. It's a similar death, and the evidence is heart-wrenching.
Holly Hughes.
Confusing right now.
Joseph Scott Moore.
Relationship.
All right, Yale Galanter, one word to describe the evidence in this case.
Deficient.
Janet Johnson, one word.
Controversial.
Joey Jackson.
Confounding.
Darren Kavanoki, the king of the one-worders.
Here's my combinoki for tonight. Tragiflicting. Tragic and conflicting.
And we're going to go through it tonight, folks. This is our job tonight. As we get ready for this trial to begin, we're going to show you the evidence before the jury in Sanford sees it, and we're going to break it down from both perspectives. What does it mean? And our in-studio jury will give us a sneak peek, perhaps, at what that jury in Sanford is going to think about this evidence.
This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining and he's just walking around looking about. Something's wrong with him. Yeah, he's coming to check me out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
The evidence in this case begins when George Zimmerman calls police non-emergency to report what he says is suspicious behavior by someone he sees in his neighborhood. That person is Trayvon Martin. Let's take a listen to more of that phone call that George Zimmerman made to police.
He's got his hand in his waistband. Yeah, he's a black male.
Okay. How old would you say he was?
He's got a button on his shirt. Late teens.
Okay, just let me know if he does anything, okay?
Over here.
Yeah, we got him on the way. Just let me know if this guy does anything else.
Okay. They always get away. Yeah. When you come to the clubhouse, you come straight in and make a left. Actually, you would go past the clubhouse. No, you go in straight through the entrance, and then you make a left. Yeah, you go straight in, don't turn and make a left. He's running.
He's running? Which way is he running?
Down towards the other entrance of the neighborhood.
Okay. Which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
All right, from my perspective, when we start listening to this call, the first thing, Trayvon Martin's actions. Is he acting suspiciously?
He was going home to watch the NBA All-Star game with his dad from the convenience store. I don't see anything suspicious unless you're reading into, some racial clues.
But it's got to be from the perspective of Zimmerman. Was he acting suspicious to Zimmerman? And it sounds like Zimmerman was sort of heightened on this heightened alert because of all the break-ins in the neighborhood. And so he thought that this kid possibly was one of the people that was doing the break-ins. So in a self-defense case, you've got to try and get in the head of Zimmerman and think what he's thinking.
But speaking about the head of Zimmerman, let's talk about that, Vinny, because Zimmerman has a history going back years of calling the police every time he sees a young black male, okay? He called the police on an 8-year-old young black male to complain one time. If you go back in time, he has a history of like over 50-some, 60-some calls, and he'll call that non-emergency number. And to me, that's more important because it goes to his mindset of why he was thinking what he was thinking that night. I mean, he calls the police every time he sees a young black man in the neighborhood.
I think probably the problem here is that Zimmerman has this predisposed template that he applies to everybody that enters this complex. He applies it to everybody, and I have to tell you, Vinny, that's very, very dangerous. You're dealing with something very volatile here.
Not everybody, just 20% of the population.
Yale Galanter, is Trayvon Martin doing anything suspicious here?
It doesn't sound like he was doing anything suspicious, but, Ashley's right. It's really in the mind of George Zimmerman. He thinks something's wrong. He does the appropriate thing. He calls the police. The mistake that Zimmerman, of course, makes is that he doesn't stand down and he doesn't listen to that police operator and he keeps following Martin.
Darren, to me, this is where everything starts here because in his mind, there's suspicious activity on the part of Trayvon Martin.
Well, let's see what our jurors have to say. So let's get the paddles ready. You've heard the evidence, yes or no. Was Trayvon acting suspicious? That's the question. Get him up high, Summer. Now, that's an ambiguous no. Let's start with you.
I think not yet. I think he was just walking in the neighborhood, and like you said, I think his Zimmerman was heightened awareness, so I think he thought anything with a hood on may have been suspicious at that moment.
Okay, but you're still a little wavering, and I see back here a wavering yes from juror number 10, so what makes you waver yes?
There's a figure of speech that perception is reality, and when you have an experience where you feel like law enforcement is not taking you seriously, and in a case where you're calling the police 70 times in less than 9 months, that can happen.
Right.
And you do hear him say they always get away. So that being said, you know, his perception is, okay, this guy's about to get away. He's running. In my mind, that's equating to, okay, this could be a suspect given previous crimes.
In your mind, you think that Zimmerman thinks he's acting suspiciously, but to you, do you think there's anything that objectively tells you Trayvon's acting suspicious?
If I was a victim of crime, or people in my neighborhood were victims of crime on a regular basis and nothing was being done, I would probably be paranoid. I wouldn't kill anybody, but I would be paranoid.
Got it.
It's happened. It's recently, so.
Interesting. So we've got a real diversity of opinion, and we're just getting started over here, Vinny. There's a lot to talk about yet from these folks.
Absolutely. Janet Johnson, what do you think about all this? Do you think the behavior of Trayvon Martin, what he was doing, what George Zimmerman's describing, is that suspicious behavior?
Well, what I tell my 17-year-old defendants is all adults are suspicious of 17-year-old males. So from the adult perspective, I think we're all, you know, whether it's a white kid, an African-American kid, we're all a little suspicious at night of a 17-year-old on the street if we're alone. So they have to be sort of on the alert that adults are going to be suspicious of them. So yeah, I think that one juror is right. As adults, and especially if you've been the victim of a crime, it probably would be suspicious. As it turns out, he had Skittles and an iced tea, so he was wrong.
But the problem is when he goes from neighborhood watchman to neighborhood chaseman.
And that's another issue we got to get to. Was he pursuing him? Was he following him? This is what we're going to do. We're going to take you back to the scene. We've got more evidence to look at. What was found at the scene of the shooting of Trayvon Martin? You'll see it next.
Trials are about the truth. Trials are about a search for the truth. In this case, it's going to turn on the issue of reasonableness. Did George Zimmerman act reasonably? Did he act rationally? Did he act responsibly? And most importantly, did he act justifiably? What's the answer to that question? We don't know. We don't prejudge. But we will learn soon as the evidence unfolds in this compelling case.
He was about there, but he was walking towards me. And he said, "You got a problem now." And then he was here, and he punched me in the face. That's when my jacket moved up, and I had my firearm on my right side hip. My jacket moved up, and he saw it. I feel like he saw it. He looked at it, and he said, "You're gonna die tonight." He reached for it, but he reached, like, I felt his arm going down to my side, and I grabbed it, and I just grabbed my firearm, and I shot him.
That's George Zimmerman the day after the shooting, taking police back to the scene. And welcome to the HLNTV.com evidence room. I want to take you to the scene right now so I can show you what was found at the scene by investigators. And we begin with the bullet casing, which was found. We take a look here. And if you look at the nature of this picture, it's really not super clear. And a lot of that has to do with the weather. I mean, it was dark. It was a rainy night. But the casing is right here inside this picture. Also found at the scene, and this was George Zimmerman's. This was the gun. One of our jurors was asking about the gun. This is it. It's a Kel-Tec 9 gun. Also here is the holster that he had, that George Zimmerman was wearing, and here's the magazine as well. Also found at the scene, ladies and gentlemen, was the cell phone of Trayvon Martin. Significant piece of evidence because from the cell phone records, they were able to track down witness number 8, Trayvon's girlfriend, who he was on the phone with until the moment of the confrontation. She actually heard some of that through the cell phone. Also found at the scene was the flashlight. George Zimmerman had a flashlight with him, but he was explaining to investigators that it just wasn't working that night. And during the interrogation, the police officer kind of hit the flashlight and said, "There, it's working now." But George Zimmerman wasn't able to use that as he was out and about looking for Trayvon Martin. Also found at the scene, ladies and gentlemen, the iced tea that was purchased at the 7-Eleven, the Arizona watermelon drink that was purchased by Trayvon Martin that night. Also found as well was a bag from the 7-Eleven. And again, what wasn't found, no burglary tools, no drugs, no weapons on Trayvon Martin. So Darren Kavanaugh, that's in a nutshell what was found at the scene where Trayvon Martin was shot and killed by George Zimmerman.
Well, Vinny, we've got questions for days out of this jury, so I want to negotiate for a little more time. I think we need a whole hour-long special on juror questions, but let me start with you, number 8. You had a question.
Yeah, one of the questions I would have had is, if he called the authorities 40 times in the last year, how many of those times did he actually pursue somebody? And if this was the first time, what made this so different?
You know, what's interesting here, Darren, and this is something that's going to come out during the trial, is that just 3 weeks prior to him seeing Trayvon Martin, where he saw him, he saw someone else in front of this same exact house. He wasn't in his car that night. He was walking his dog, and that person got away before police were able to come to the scene and find out what that person was doing. So that's at least one instance, and that's what I think was in George Zimmerman's mind, and I believe that's what prosecutors will argue during the case. Just 3 weeks before he saw Trayvon Martin, he saw someone else in front of the same exact house.
So maybe he's monitoring that area for some suspicious activity. Juror number 3, you were dying to ask a question here.
I'm not clear what suspicious is. He never says he's looking in the window, he's looking in cars. What is it that he's doing that makes him suspicious? If you've never seen him before, you don't know how he walks. You don't know his gait. So how is it suspicious?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, Vinny, what's so suspicious
throw that
about
one
this
over
guy?
to the table, Darren. Throw that to the table. Let them figure that one out.
So what's so suspicious, experts? Come on.
The only thing, Darren, the only thing that he was able to say is that he's out here in the rain. That's the only thing that he was able to say is, well, it's raining out and he's walking in the rain. If you listen to the language, right, what is suspicious about that? And that explains why he had his hood up. So there goes your whole scary guy in a hoodie argument. If it's raining, I'm going to put my hood up.
So wait, so let me interpret that answer. Nothing suspicious, okay? We all clear, there's nothing suspicious. Juror number 6, you had a question.
My question is if his girlfriend is a minor in the state of Florida, will we be able to hear her testimony?
Okay. Are minors coming to the witness stand? We got a Florida lawyer here.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, they've already talked to her, and there's a controversy over, Ben Crump, who's the attorney for the family, kind of like I am Jordan Davis, who's not really a part of the official proceedings, but he's already spoken with her, and she's going to be testifying at trial.
So,
Darren, one more point on that. We believe now that she's not a minor, that she's actually 19 years old. So that may be another aspect of all this. We got a lot more evidence to go through, folks. That's what we're doing. We're showing you the evidence before the jury in Sanford, Florida sees it.
Very important questions for the prosecution to uncover. Number 1, was the force used here by George Zimmerman proportionate to the threat that was posed? Number 2, was he in imminent fear for his life? The answers to those questions will be the justice that is found in this case.
We are all preparing for the George Zimmerman second-degree murder trial that's about to take place in Sanford, Florida. It's been a year now, over a year, since 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was gunned down in a residential area. Still, the facts remain murky. Despite bringing in audio experts, it's still undetermined who screamed out just before Trayvon was shot dead. Was it George Zimmerman, the defendant, the suspect? Was he screaming because Trayvon had turned on him and began pounding his head into the cement? Was he screaming, or was it the 17-year-old boy that sustained a mortal gunshot wound that evening?
Welcome back to HLN After Dark. I'm here with Joseph Scott Morgan. He's a death investigator, and want to take a look at the autopsy, ladies and gentlemen. I want to show you the autopsy and have Joseph explain to us what it means and what the evidence shows us. And let's begin here. This photo. What does this show us, and what does it tell you?
Absolutely, Vinny. The most significant thing that we can see at this level is obviously the area that's been indicated right here. This is the entrance of the gunshot wound. This was identified by the medical examiner who did the autopsy, and we can see these little dots that are indicated around this area. This is referred to as stippling. This is the residue that's left over after the actual round has passed through the body, entered into Trayvon's body, and passed through his heart.
And what does it mean?
Well, what this means, this gives us an indication of range of fire. How far away were these two individuals away from one another when the weapon was discharged? In other words, like I said earlier, relationship. What's the relationship between Zimmerman and Martin? And this is critical to our case.
Okay, let's take a look at the, got to go to the next photo here from the autopsy. These are the hands of Trayvon Martin. What, if anything, does this tell you?
Okay. Incidental finding over here, scars. We all have these on our body. However, this area right in here, this is what some people have held as being significant. I don't really know. It's a 1/4 by 1/8 inch abrasion. The medical examiner is not very clear as to whether or not this is healing or if it's fresh, but this I do know. This is the only injury that Martin has on either one of his hands. So this would indicate that there's not a lot of defensive posturing that's going on. There's not a lot of contact that's going on that you would see in like a protracted fight.
Okay, after reading the autopsy, can you demonstrate for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how far away and what the relationship was between George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin at the time of the shooting?
Absolutely. I'm going to be Zimmerman. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what we believe is that what the police have said is that the back of Zimmerman's clothing was wet when they viewed him. And this is very interesting. It's critical relative to the range of fire. This is one thought. Zimmerman very well may have been on the ground at this point. His weapon is holstered. Martin is advancing on him. He's standing over the top of him, and as he is coming down towards Zimmerman, Zimmerman raises the weapon. Now, this is significant. The muzzle of the weapon touches the garment. Now, we know that that Martin was wearing a hoodie. We believe, as everybody can identify with, the clothing falls away. There's a conflict in the report. This weapon is fired. It discharges through the hoodie, through the T-shirt. The firearms examiner identifies this as a contact wound. The medical examiner says that the wound to the body was actually an intermediate distance, which means there was distance between the two.
What's intermediate? How long is
intermediate, we're talking about 2 inches to 12 inches.
2 to 12 inches.
Yes,
so
sir.
Contact, you're saying, because the hoodie is hanging off of the body.
Absolutely. And it's contact.
But intermediate because the hoodie is not next to the body, so you'd have that 2 to 12 inches there plus the contact here.
Exactly. And this goes to one other issue. Why is Trayvon's DNA not on the weapon? Well, you've got a barrier in between the weapon and Trayvon's body. Anything that enters the body and anything that's dispersed out of the body is not going to contact on what we refer to as blowback.
Gotcha. Darren?
Wow. So, well, this is great, but now let's get ready to unleash the paddles. Here is the question, and this may be one of the most important questions in this case. Based on what you know now, do you believe that Trayvon Martin was going for Zimmerman's gun? Yes or no? Was Trayvon going for his gun? You're a little on the fence there, but I'm seeing a no, so tell me why no.
Well, how did he know he had a gun? Was it in view? Had Zimmerman already taken it out of his pocket?
Right, so, and what's interesting is that we're out here in the rain, layers of clothing, so maybe Trayvon didn't even know that George Zimmerman had a gun. I think this is one that certainly our jurors are going to be wrestling with, right? We say, well, maybe not so much, only one yes. Vinny?
All right, we got a lot more evidence to go through, forensics, phone calls, 911. Who was screaming? That's a big question in this case.
Does the evidence support close contact? Was this self-defense? Is there reasonable doubt? Will the state be able to prove their case? Will they get a conviction for second-degree murder? Or was George Zimmerman acting reasonably within the bounds of Florida law and acting in self-defense because he was in fear of his life? Those are all the questions that we have to answer in this case.
In Florida, the prosecution can introduce evidence that the victim of a homicide was peaceful if it suggested he's the first aggressor. But if they do that, it opens the door to Trayvon's character.
I don't know why I think they're yelling help, but I don't know.
Does he look hurt to you?
I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right, what is your...
Those screams in the background of the 911 calls made by neighbors, is that the key to this case? I mean, if the jury believes George Zimmerman is screaming, is this self-defense? If the jury believes it's Trayvon Martin screaming, is this murder? And if the jury can't figure out who's screaming, what does that mean?
I mean, this could be very powerful evidence if they can definitively say who is screaming for help, because that shows you who at that point in time was the aggressor and who was the underdog. And that's very important in a self-defense case.
And I would go self-defense to what? If there are no marks on the hands, Trayvon didn't have his fingerprints or DNA on the gun, what was he defending against?
Exactly. And Vinny, you cannot bring a gun to a fist fight. I'm sorry, it's unequal force. So it doesn't matter who was screaming. Even if Trayvon was hitting George Zimmerman, George does not have the right to pull out a semi-automatic weapon and shoot that young man in the heart because he got punched.
Yale Galanter, what do you think about the screams? Is this the whole case? Who is screaming?
Yeah, I mean, if the audio tape and the forensic experts can definitively convince the jury who was screaming for help, that clearly would show who the aggressor is and who the defender is. And if it turns out that Zimmerman was the aggressor, as opposed to being in fear of his life, that could mean a conviction for him. But from what I've heard, you know, the science and the forensics on the audio tapes aren't going to be great for either side. I don't think they're going to be able to say who it was. And, you know, when you look at the forensics, the close contact, Zimmerman being on his back, the broken nose, the wounds on the back of the head, seems to indicate that he's got a prima facie case for self-defense here.
Well, let's do this, because it may come down to just the jury listening over and over again to the 911 calls, trying to figure out for themselves. So let's take a listen, because there's more than one call where you hear the screams in the background. Take a listen and see if you can figure out who's screaming.
They're wrestling right in the back of my porch. I just heard a shot right behind my house.
You just heard one shot go off?
It was either that or a rock at the window or something. I don't know. The guy's yelling help.
Yeah, Trader, it's a gunshot. Hurry up. Stay on the line with me and just update me. Did you see anything at all, or you just heard screaming?
I heard screaming and then a gunshot.
And someone's yelling 2 doors down from me, screaming, hollering, help, help, help. It sounds like a male.
And you don't know why?
I don't know why. I think they're yelling help, but I don't know.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right, what is your...
Oh, God. I mean, they're looking at the person that's dead. I just couldn't move. Oh, God.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the jury, now, before you decide who is screaming on this 911 call, I want to reveal what's in my mystery box tonight. But before I do, remember, on that 911 call, you can hear the screaming, and it's going on and off for about 20 seconds before the gunshot. So now, let's take a look at what's inside the box tonight. There it is, folks. Take a look at it. It's a voice stress analysis of George Zimmerman. Now, when Zimmerman took this voice stress analysis test, he described what was happening just before he shot Trayvon Martin. Take a listen.
Then I started screaming for help. And he covered my nose with one hand and my mouth with the other one. And he told me, shut up. And I couldn't breathe. I was suffocating. But when I shifted, my jacket came up and my shirt came up and exposed my firearm. And that's when he said, he like sat up and looked and said, "You're gonna die tonight." And I felt him take one hand off my mouth and slide it down my chest. And I just pinched his arm and I grabbed my gun and I aimed it at him and fired one shot.
All right, so Darren and ladies and gentlemen of the jury, with that extra piece of information about Zimmerman there describing how his mouth was covered just before Trayvon reached for the gun, let's see what the jury thinks about who was screaming on that 911 call, Darren.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we heard why this might be such a critical piece of evidence for both sides in this case. So you can put the paddles down. Show of hands. Who here thinks it was Trayvon Martin that was screaming? Raise your hands. Okay, who here thinks that it was not Trayvon, that it was George Zimmerman that was screaming? Okay, who here raised their hand twice? Anybody? All right, well, so tell us about it, juror number 11.
Well, just based on what I've seen from the interaction the two gentlemen had earlier, I don't really see why George Zimmerman would be screaming. I just don't understand why he would, especially when he's the one with the firearm, and he knows that.
So, okay, great comment. Let's go down to juror number 10.
I'd say just by hearing his speaking voice and comparing it to the screams, it's more likely that it was him screaming. And then in dealing...
Wait, more likely that it was, who's the
Zimmerman screaming,
okay.
not Martin. And I would say that the screams were as a result, assuming that his testimony is factual, of being outmatched physically. He probably, if it is indeed true that his clothing was wet and he was on the ground being assaulted, screamed for help, as in, help me, I'm getting beat up pretty badly, somebody help. And people heard it, but no one came and helped. So at that point, he's like, okay, what do I do?
What do I do? Okay, we got a lot more to talk about. We're going to get to it next on After Dark.
All right, time for our lightning round. Our online jury has a lot of questions about the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case. Each of our experts has 15 seconds to answer the questions. Let's begin on Twitter. Elaine, people are questioning why Zimmerman even had a gun, but he didn't have a permit. How will the gun play into all this? Yale Galanter, how will the gun play into all this?
It shouldn't. Guns are legal in Florida. Zimmerman had a permit to carry a concealed weapon. A lot of members of the jury are going to have guns in their homes and on their person and have concealed weapons permits. If he was lawful to have the gun and he was in fear of his life, he was able to use it in the state of Florida.
Well played, Yale. Let's see who else has a question on Twitter. Michael, why should Zimmerman have listened to the 911 operator who wasn't even a police officer? Do they have authority as law enforcement? Holly Hughes.
Yes, they do. They're not, they're not post-certified. They don't carry weapons, but they are law enforcement. When you call 911, you get a law enforcement officer, and he was told, we don't need you to do that. Now, remember, that wasn't a command. Stop doing it. But he said, we don't need you to do it.
Well done in 15 seconds. On Facebook, Lisa asking, do the forensics support Zimmerman's version of the story? Has that info been released yet? Joseph Scott Morgan, what do you think?
If he was, in fact, down on his back, we have evidence that he was damp on the backside, and also the relationship between the end of the muzzle and the gunpowder that we have. I think, yeah, it does. But also, they could have been standing. We never know.
All right, another question on Facebook. Brenda, do you all think there will be a much larger split in public opinion and support compared to the Jodi Arias trial? How can that affect this trial? Joey Jackson.
There's no question about the fact that there will be people who have views strongly in one way or the other. What it comes down to, though, is what the jury thinks and what the jury feels about the presentation of the evidence. But this will not be a Jodi Arias all consistent with guilt.
All right, let's see what folks are asking on HLNTV.com. Gary, why isn't Zimmerman charged with first-degree murder? Janet Johnson, you're a Florida attorney.
Yeah, and most people in Florida think he's overcharged even with second degree. First degree murder would say he premeditated to do this, and yes, we could argue you could formulate that in moments, but that would be overcharging. As it is, I think second degree is overcharging. I think it's a manslaughter at the most.
All right at the buzzer, too, by the way. All right, time for one more question. This is from Jennifer. Why isn't Trayvon's character allowed to be explored in court? The bad behavior, drugs, trouble at school. Ashley Merchant.
This evidence might come in at some point in the trial. It's got to become relevant, though. Either the prosecution has to put Trayvon's character at issue, or Zimmerman has to prove that he somehow knew about this, and this affected his self-defense theory.
All right. Well done by all our experts. Keep the questions coming. By the way, we've been talking about the evidence throughout the program. Well, coming up, we're going to talk about what the jury isn't going to know during the trial.
Weeks before the incident on February 26th, he was the first of our grandmother's grandchildren to arrive at the hospital where she was admitted, staying by her side, sleeping on the floor if necessary, to care for her. Soon after, my father had a heart attack, and George was not only the first one of us to tend to him in the hospital, but also facilitated my arrival in Florida and arranged transportation for me so that I'd be able to help my family cope.
All right, we've been looking at all the evidence that the jury in Sanford, Florida is going to be considering in the George Zimmerman case. But let's take a look at what the jury isn't going to know. Some of the evidence that's been excluded from court. And we begin here with the toxicology of Trayvon Martin, the THC that was in his system. That's the chemical associated with marijuana. Jury not going to know about that. Next, let's take a look at something else the jury's not going to know about. Some of the text messages that Trayvon Martin was sending. Incoming. Why are you not in school? Trayvon, suspended. Incoming. I thought you was going out with your friend. Trayvon, no, my old G say she don't want me home because she think I'm going to get in more trouble. Then Trayvon says, fighting. So those text messages not going to come in. Let's take a look at another text message that's not coming in. Incoming message to Trayvon. You want a .22 revolver. Trayvon, what shooter? Trayvon, can Fool meet me at the gym? Bro, I'm here. Tell Fool I got 80 for him right now because we're going to smoke one last time. So again, references here to smoking pot, drugs, and a weapon here as well. Text messages that aren't coming in. Let's take a look at some other things the jury's not going to find out about. George Zimmerman's mugshot. This is from back in 2005 when he was arrested for assaulting an undercover ATF officer at a club that he was at with some friends. That's not coming in, no conviction. Let's take a look at what else this jury's not going to find out about. George Zimmerman, protective order against his ex-fiancée. They had reciprocal protective orders against one another, domestic violence. The jury's not going to hear about that either. Darren Kavanoki.
Well, jurors, get those paddles ready. We just heard a lot of bad stuff, some about Trayvon, some about George. Should we let it all in and let it all hang out? Should the jurors know about that evidence? Yes or no? Should they know? We got a bunch of yeah, and we got some no's. I'm going to start down here with number 7, who is from the same county where all this happened. What's your take?
I don't think the jury should need to know about the previous history of either client because what's at stake or what's in question is what happened on that day at that moment in time, who provoked the incident in the first place.
Interesting. So for you, none of that prior stuff makes a difference. All right, what about you, number 9? What do you say?
For me, I believe the stuff about Trayvon is not necessary because what he's texting sometimes is a lot of hype. So him smoking marijuana, I think that's irrelevant because nobody knows if he was smoking at that point or when he was. Yes, it was in his system because he do smoke. But as far as Zimmerman's background and his protective order and assaulting an officer, I think that should be relevant.
Interesting, interesting. Do we have a yes? We've got a yes here, number 10?
I say yes, but I
Let
know
it all in.
the legal system would not allow that, and if it was allowed, it would be grounds for an appeal, so that's not realistic.
But you would want to hear about it. If you're on that jury, you want to know.
I would, only because that establishes disposition of both parties.
So,
attitude.
Unlike number 7, you think that who you were in the past may be an indication of who you are right now.
Dr. Phil always says, past behavior.
Yeah, can equal current performance.
Future behavior, exactly.
Boy, we've got a diversity of opinion over here. And by the way, these people have a lot more stuff to say, Vinny. I think we need a whole 1-hour special with this bunch of jurors.
Maybe we should do it 4 times a week. Oh, we will, folks, during this trial. Don't worry. How about the lawyers here? All this stuff that's being kept out, is there any way any of this comes in, or should it come in? What does it tell us?
The door can be open for certain things. Now, the issue is Trayvon Martin's dead. We can't analyze his voice to see whether he fit the 911 tape. There's a lot we can't do, and he can't defend himself and say, well, this text message is taken out of context. So there's the standard there that we've really got to uphold and protect the kid that can't speak for himself now.
How about George Zimmerman, right? He gets arrested a couple times, but never convicted.
Right, but that's not relevant. I mean, he wasn't convicted. It's not a conviction, so it can't be used to impeach him. And it's not a situation where he claimed self-defense, so it's not something similar to this situation. So it's really not relevant. And the prejudice for the jury hearing that would far outweigh that relevance. And the court has to determine that. It's kind of a weighing. It's a balancing.
Prejudice versus probative value, right? That's what it's all about, Holly?
403, yeah, the evidence rules, 403. Basically, what you want the jury, and our juror, number 7, was dead on, Vinny, when he said it isn't about if Trayvon smoked weed last year, and it isn't about if George got into a fight with his ex-girlfriend. It is about what happened on that night in that location in Sanford, Florida. And we don't want to prejudice the jury to either side. We don't want them thinking Trayvon is a throwaway kid because he was a brat and he smoked weed and he was talking about getting a gun and was violent. None of that may be true. Okay, and we also don't want the jury to look at George Zimmerman before the evidence even opens in this case and say he's a big bad bully who runs around acting like a law enforcement officer and he needs to be taken off the street. We want it to be about what happened that night between those two parties.
And what I'm hearing from a lot of people, not every juror, but I'm hearing from the lawyers, is the judge made the right call here, and we've got a long way to go. We're just getting started. We haven't even picked a jury for this case, but our jury will be here every night.